Hi, my name's Connor Donetto. I'm a composer, producer, and visual artist based in Brisbane on Yagara and Turrbal land. In this episode of Joining the Dots, I'm really excited to take you into one of my favorite software tools for building experimental, generative, electroacoustic, and electronic music. It's called Max MSP, and it's a platform on which you can build whatever you can dream of to process data, whether that's audio or visuals or video. So it's a really fantastic program for anyone who's looking at creating really unique stuff, whether it's their own effects or their own synthesizers or doing video art or glitch art. It can be a bit of an intimidating program, there's so much in there, it's so vast, but don't worry, I'm going to take your hand, take you through the absolute basics, and build a few examples to show you a few of the things and hopefully get you started on your Max journey. Before we get underway, head down to the links in the description or comments or wherever you're watching this video, where you can download a trial of Max, as well as download all the examples that I've shown you during this video, and some other resources that I've put in there for you. So download that, bring them up, and you can watch and work along with me as we go through the tutorial. Okay, let's get started. Okay, we're in Max. We've opened Max on our computer. This is the icon for Max down here. And just ignore all the stuff on the side. That's just so I can record this video. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and go to File and open a new patcher. We call it a patch in Max instead of a file. Anyway, and this is what comes up. It's a big blank slate. Now that might be a little bit different if you're used to a program like Logic or Ableton. And that's because programs like Logic and Ableton are based on a very different real-world hardware piece of equipment. So let's show you. So you're probably more used to something looking like this. This is the standard window that opens when you open Ableton Live. And this is a pretty standard setup if you're looking at a new Logic file. And most other bits of software, Cubase, Pro Tools, any other digital audio workstation, DAW, most of them look something along the lines of these. And that is because most of those software are based, in terms of the analog or hardware equipment that came before the computer versions, most of them are based on this. This is a mixer. This is a mixing desk, a small one. You've probably seen the really huge ones in recording studios as well. And a mixer is designed to do a couple of things really, really well. They're designed for mixing down tracks or live performances, so taking in audio signals up the top here, and then you set how much gain you have. You may send them out to some effects and then route them back in. You may do some EQ and some pan, and then you set the volume. And then all of that comes along and then comes out as your output. So that's a mixer. And Logic and Ableton are, and most other DAWs are basically designed the same way. They're for you to be able to mix together multiple tracks or multiple instruments so that you can create a mix, for you to create your song or whatever. Max, on the other hand, is not based on a mixer. It's based on a completely different bit of real-world audio equipment. It is based on this. This is my modular synth. It might look a bit empty and strange. In fact, it might look like a wooden box with some panels on the front of it and some cables on the inside. Don't worry about the inside. I've currently had to take it apart to have some bits serviced, but that's kind of the point of a modular synth. A modular synthesizer, or Eurorack modular as you'll hear it called sometimes, is made up of a case and then a number of different modules. These different modules each are designed to do just a couple of tasks really specifically. So like this one here is a metronome, or this one here is a filter, and this one's a reverb, and that's a little mini mixer. And so the point is, and I've got to ton of other random ones here that I haven't put in, such as this one is a distortion, and this one here is a little rhythm sequencer, and that one kind of just pans your signal. And so the point of modular is that you get a blank canvas and you put in whatever the things that you want in your system, and you build a system specific to your needs. And then when you've got your system, you'll see there are all these jacks which are empty. And basically, whereas the mixer has all of its cabling and its wiring on the inside and you can't change anything, a modular system has exposed wiring, and then you get patch cables, and you'll take a cable, and depending on what you're doing, you'll wire it up. And so eventually you'll end up with really complex patches with all these wires between different modules to create the exact system tailored to what you need. So every modular system ends up being different. And that's what Max is based on. So let's jump back into Max. Okay, back in Max with our blank patch. And so like I said, Max is based on a modular system in that you have many different objects, and then they're connected by patches to create your system. So I'm going to take you through the basic tools in Max, and then we're going to build a couple of demonstration patches. Okay, so the first kind of thing that Max has is called the, like I said, object. So if you go up here, add object, it'll give you examples of certain ones that are in Max, but an easier way is if you press N, the letter N on your keyboard, it'll come up with a blank object, and you type in the object that you want. It does mean you need to learn like a bit of a lexicon of different objects, but don't worry, I'll go through a few simple ones with you. So I'm going to type in the object metro. Metro. Click enter. And so now I've got the object metro. Now, if you've typed in an object, oh, and you would have seen when I was typing in, it came up with some examples. So, you know, I typed in F and it thinks here's a bunch of different things starting with F. So it kind of helps you along the way if you're trying to work out what you need. So I've typed in metro. What does metro do? Well, if you right click or two finger click or side click, whatever, and you go open metro help, it'll come up with a really nice example and demonstration of what metro does. So you can do that on any object, and that'll really help you to get to know all the things that are out there. But continuing on, so that's an object. An object, each little object does one or two really specific things. So for example, a metro is a metronome. It, when you turn it on and you tell it how often to click, it sends out a bang. What is a bang? That tells us that's about the other type of thing in here, which is a message. So I just pressed M and I got this type of box here, and that's a message box. A message box is a message, some sort of bit of information which is sent around the patch. And a very specific and important message there is in Max is called a bang. If you press the letter B, you get this little button here. And I'll just put it in presentation mode. If you go down here, there's a little lock. When you lock it, it means you're not building things, you're just interacting with things. And if you unlock it, that's when we can move things around. So a bang. What is a bang? A bang is a type of message that literally is the word bang, and it means do the thing. If you send a bang message to most objects, it will trigger whatever the thing you were intending it to do is. So, for example, this metronome, when you turn it on, it sends out bang messages. So I'm going to tell this metronome I'm going to give it an argument. An argument is a little bit of extra information in the name of an object that dictates how it works. So I've made a space, and it's come down arguments interval number. So that's how often do you want it to click, like a metronome. In Max, everything is always in milliseconds. So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So I'm going to say I want it to go 500 milliseconds. Every 500 milliseconds it's going to click. That's twice a second. Okay? I'm going to connect this outlet to there. So that's the first patch cable. So that is the output. It's always, on every object, the output of an object is always at the bottom, and the inputs are at the top. So Max patches always are working from the top to the bottom. So there's going to come a bang out of here into this bang, and then this will flash, showing us that a bang has happened. Now, nothing's happened, and nothing's happening, and that's because we got to turn the metronome on. So to turn the metronome on, it's up here and it says start stop metronome. Most objects start and stop with the number 1 or the number 0. 0 turns things off, 1 turns things on. And that is also known as a trigger. If you press T, you'll get this little X. And so that sends out the messages 0 and 1, depending on what state it's in. So I'll lock it again. We'll turn it on. And now we've got our bang messages coming out. And let's see if I were to connect this to the blue input, which, as it says, sets the message without output. So it sets what is in that message box, but it doesn't output that message at that time. You can see that what is coming out is literally the word bang. So there's just a very, very simple overview of some of the really main structural things that you need to know at a very basic. There's toggles, which is zeros and ones. Objects, which are little things that do a specific task. And a bang. A bang is a type of message that tells something, do that thing now. And messages, which are other bits of information. They may be numbers, they may be words, and they are passed around your system however you need them to be. Okay, that's a really, really simple starting point. I'm going to build 3 patches and walk you through them, and as I said, you can download those files in the links below. I'm going to build 3 patches that will kind of demonstrate a few different things in here. I'm going to build a random note generator, so something that's going to, starting out with this Metro object that we've just done here, that's going to generate random notes, MIDI notes. I'm going to build a small synthesizer that's going to take in those notes, those note messages, and make sound with them. And then I'm going to build a little delay effect so that, we've got something more fun to listen to. I've got this metronome. It's sending out a bang every 500. So we're going to say that that's how often I want a new note. Now we're talking about random notes, so we need something that generates random notes. And in this context, because we're talking MIDI notes, numbers. So got a new object, and you might have guessed it that a random note generator is called random. Okay. And so at the top, it says causes number output. See how it's a little red orange? That means that is a hot output. A hot input, as opposed to this blue one, which is a cold input. The hot out inputs is when you send it a message, usually a bang, it will output something, as opposed to a cold one, which sets one of its parameters. In this case, it sets the range of random number. So if I connect this one here, it's now actually outputting a number at each one of those bangs. But we need to set the range, so that's an argument. Range. So I'm going to say I wanted to select a random number between 0 and 100. So that's 100. Okay? And if I put a little object down below it so I can see numbers, if you press I for integer, it gives you a little box and you can see what number it is. You can see we're getting random numbers. So those numbers, specifically, there are 100 options and they're between a 0 and 99. So in MIDI numbers, MIDI goes from 0 to 127, So I don't want it to be right down the lowest, so I'm going to say I want it to be about 20 higher than the lowest note. So we go plus, and a plus object literally adds two numbers. A lot of the basics of max is mathematics. In fact, if you go into the max help and go to the max reference, and I encourage you to go through this. If you go to the max reference and go home, it has all these tutorials, and if you go into the max ones, it literally is mostly learning how to do maths. So as I said, here it tells you about the bang message, tells you about numbers, tells you about the metro object and the toggle, so all the things we've just talked about. And then a lot of the next ones are about simple mathematics. So let's just go into that one quickly. If you go open tutorial, it'll open you a nice file teaching you about it. So mathematics, it's kind of the basic bit of Max, and that's why learning Max can not only be a bit daunting, but sometimes a bit boring at the very beginning, but hopefully by the end of this tutorial, I'll show you that there's a lot of fun things in there. So I want it to be at least 20 from the bottom, so plus 20, and there you go. Now, that number is always 20 above that number. Okay, so I've gone and cleaned up a few things and improved it. So we've got our toggle, our metro, and our bang as we had before. Our random number, I kind of limited it down to 60. I thought that'll sound a bit better. Plus 20, and then our number. So so this here is what we had before. Below it, got this object, TII. What that does, so T sends an input to many places, and then you put in a number of symbols afterwards that tell it what you want it to send out. So in this one, I put I and I. So that is integers. I stands for integers, which is a whole number, a number without a decimal place. And that's because it's getting in a number, and I'm telling it to send out that number to two different places. Max always works from right to left. The order in which it sends out things, because the computer is actually not processing everything at the same time. It's actually processing each event in an order. So when this object, the T object, receives that number, it sends it out to the rightmost input first, so output order 1, integer, and then to the leftmost input. Now, that seems a little bit finicky, but it becomes important sometimes, and that's because in this instance, I wanted to send it to this left input, the cold input of this pack object, and we'll get to that in a second, before the right. Now, this next section is because the random numbers we were getting before were purely random, and I don't know about you, but 12-tone chromatic complete random notes doesn't sound particularly musical to me. So I wanted a way to how do I get these notes fit in within a scale, fit within something musical. So what we're doing here is basically getting all of these notes to fit within C major. So the modulo object there is basically, I'll open up, or the percentage symbol, otherwise known as modulo in maths. It divides two numbers and outputs the remainder. So what it's essentially doing is if you set it to, in this case, 12, any number over 12, it gets divided by 12 and then put through again. So say we send, gonna do it over here, modulo 12 out. So say we send it a 1, you get out a 1. If we send it a 5, you get out a 5. But if you send it a 13, you get out a 1, because it's 1 above 12. And then that keeps going 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 24 you get 0, because it always starts at 0, so it's actually sending out 0 to 11. 25, you get a 1. 26, you get a 2, because it's 2 above 12 times 2. Okay? A little bit of maths. The pack object, what it does is it takes however many inputs you're getting, and currently I've told it just to have 2 inputs, that's the standard, and it puts them into one message. So it creates, like this example here, which is leftovers from me testing it, it puts the number that comes through here, which is the original number moduloed over 12, and the original number by itself. So if we start turning this back on, you'll see it's sending through 2 numbers. And the reason I've done this is that modulo, if we're dividing it by 12, we're getting it back to just numbers between 0 and 11. It's basically telling us what note they are. So a 0 is C, and a 1 is C sharp, a D is 2, etc., etc. This root object, basically it takes in a message with whatever, and you set whatever you want it to look for, and it'll send through out of its outputs anything that starts with those numbers. So I've set it to look for zeros, and any message, or this is a list, that type of message, a message with 2 bits in it, 2 or more bits in it is a list. If it had a 0, it comes through there. Now it's coming out here. And it has a 2, it'll come through there. So, and those numbers, you could put anything in there. So that's 0, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11. That's a major scale starting at C, but you could make it anything. If you wanted it to just be passing C's and E flats and D's, then that would be 0, 2, 3, for example. This last output here, if you hover over it, input if input doesn't match. So that's the remainder. That's everything else that didn't start with one of those numbers. And I'm getting it to, so that it does, so that we don't end up with a break in the rhythm. It's adding 1, so it's trying to make it a different number, and then sending it back through. So hopefully by adding 1, it will round it up to a number that does fit in that scale. So there, now we've taken our purely random numbers we were getting here, and we've got numbers that all fit in C major. Okay, so we've just talked through that. The next little bit is I want to add velocity to it. So velocity is basically how hard you press a note or how strong you're playing a note. Usually if you're playing like a MIDI keyboard, it would send velocity information of how hard you've pressed it, and synthesizers will interpret that differently. So I'm going to get it to send random velocity, and by doing that, I've got another one of the T objects here, and I've set it to send a B. A B is a bang in this instance. So now, every time it receives a number here, it'll first send a bang out here, which means it'll process everything coming that connects on, that flows on from there first, and then it'll send the number down there, so that it packs in this number, and then when it receives that number, it'll output something. I've got another random object, sending random 100. Velocity is again 1 to 127, same as I was saying with the MIDI notes. And I want it to this time have a range of 100, and to be at least 10 from the bottom. So we're only going to be getting velocity values from 10 to 109. And so if I press this bang, you can see we've got numbers coming out the bottom. So if we start the metro object again, now we've got our note velocity pair. So the first number there is our note, and the second number there is our velocity. So that's a note on and off. Most synthesizers understand. Most, especially software synthesizers, will understand a number like that in some sort of formatting. So that is a nice little random note generator. Now I've used it to process MIDI notes, but basically what it's coming up with is 2 different sets of random numbers which you could use to control anything else. As like I said before, all these numbers have these inputs where you set a number where you're setting a parameter. So these numbers could go back in to set the parameter of anything. It might not be notes. You may be using those numbers to control a delay time or control how loud different elements, so different elements are fading in and out at different times, and that can be really exciting. But we're going to use them as MIDI notes, and so the next bit here is how to create sound. You might have noticed thus far we've just been dealing with numbers. We haven't dealt with any sound. So I'm going to create the basics of a synthesizer in here, of a software synthesizer, and it will start with an object called cycle. Cycle tilde. Now, that's really important. This, I'm just going to go up here, which is format. We just change how big this thing is. This symbol here, that little wavy line, is super important. That's called a tilde. Objects that have a tilde in their name, means that they deal at signal rate. So signal rate is that those objects are, rather than these objects which are just processing information when they get a new message. So this is just doing its thing every time it gets a new number, or this is just outputting something every 5 milliseconds, whoops. And that is just triggering a new random number on a bang. A cycle tilde, a tilde object, is constantly putting out things at tilde rate, at signal rate, which, if you go into the audio status thing up here that I've got up here, which you can access by going, where is it? Options, audio status. And it's telling me, you know, which my audio interface that I'm connected into. That's my sample rate. That's how many times per second anything with a tilde is constantly processing information. And so that's really important. And basically it means that this is producing audio. So I'm going to just put a asterisk, and asterisk is a multiply. And you can see here it's got a multiply and then a multiply tilde. And that means this one would perform multiplication. So if you sent it 2 by 2 and 2 would give you a 4. But if I go multiply tilde, it basically becomes like a trimmer. It sets how loud it's off. It amplifies or decreases the thing by multiplying the signal. So I'm just going to connect that just to show you. And you'll notice straight away that that patch cable looks different. It's all stripy, and when I hover over it, it gives you a little history meter. And that's because anything at signal rate, or therefore audio signals, is always a little object like this. Now, a cycle itself, what's a cycle? It's producing a waveform, a cycling repetitive waveform. And here, I've opened up the help file, a sinusoidal oscillator. So it generates a periodic waveform at whatever frequency you give it. And it is producing a sine wave, which is just the most basic waveform. And I'm just going to use that to demonstrate, but, you know, if you wanted a different type of waveform, you could go tri, so that's a triangle oscillator, or you could go saw, which is a sawtooth oscillator, and if you're familiar with synthesizers, you might know what those are. But anyway, cycle. So cycle takes in, frequency. So what's the frequency of the note you want to play? Now, currently coming out here, we're not getting frequency. We're getting MIDI notes. So I need to change my MIDI note into a frequency, into hertz. So if I type in, I need that, the object M to F. Convert MIDI note to frequency, M to F, MIDI to frequency. And get that there. Now again, this is our MIDI note and our MIDI velocity, so I need to unpack it, so separate up that message. And I'll show you what I'm going to do with the velocity in a second. Oh, and to make the line like nice and clean and not kind of going all over the place, if you go to arrange and you go root patch chords, if you've got a patch chord selected, it will do that. Or there's the shortcut, and the shortcut will be different on Windows, obviously. So I'm going to take the first message, which is the note, and I'll just put in a little so we can see it coming in. So that's our MIDI note, and our frequency is coming out there, and so that's the equivalent frequency. You notice I pressed I to get that because that's an integer, but because the frequency has decimal places in it sometimes, I needed to put in a floating point, so F, and F will give you that. So if I connect that here, that's telling it the frequency of each note. Now you might be wondering, why can't I hear it? And that's because we haven't actually sent the audio output anywhere yet. The audio output is this cable and it hasn't been connected to anything. So our audio output is called a DAC. So audio output on off. There's also this one called easy DAC, and I'm going to use that one because that one gives us this nice little icon, and you can tell whether the audio is running or not by whether this is lit up or not. So mine's running because, as you can see over here, I've got my microphones on so I can talk to you. So, and then I connect out my left and right inputs. Before I do that, I'm also just going to put in a live.gain, which is a volume slider. And as you can see, this one has like a nice interface to it. So that's still an object, but this is an object that's made to be an interface kind of object, something that you see and that you use. So this one looks like a slider because it's like a slider on a mixer, like what you saw before. And so I'm going to connect it up here. And you can hear our synth, and that makes it louder and softer. We have sound, random notes. I'm just going to give you an example to show you why this section here was necessary. Currently we've got everything fitting in C major and sounding kind of nice-ish. So I'm going to disconnect this for a second, and I'm just going to get the straight purely random output, which we're getting over here, and connect that up. And it sounds less musical, at least to me, but it might suit your taste. Say I wanted to make it all go faster, well, I'm going to change the interval rate up here, so that's the metronome interval rate. Currently we have every 500 milliseconds it's going to send it something. What if I make it every 50? And when we're doing these purely random numbers, it does sound like a whole heap of very random, not particularly musical stuff. But let's reconnect, making it just C major. It's a little bit better, I guess. Make it. Already getting something that could be useful depending on what you want to do with it. Let's make it a little bit. Let's go back to 500. I want to keep building on this synth, but I don't want this page to get too busy and too overfull. So I'm going to make a sub-patcher. A sub-patcher is a little sub-window where I can hide, I'll make this a little bit softer, where I can hide a number of things on this main window in a patch within it. So if I select all this stuff to go with the synth and I go edit, encapsulate, or I use that shortcut there on the keyboard, it puts it all in a sub-patcher, which always starts with P for patcher, and I'm going to name it. I'm going to call it synth. So my synth is in here, and if, when we're not in edit mode, I double click on it, it'll bring up a new window called synth with my sub-patcher. You'll notice this object here and that object there, so that's inlet. So if I type, when I'm creating an inlet, that is where it comes in. And now that we've got two inlets, if you notice the sub-patcher on the first window, it's got a second little thing there, and that's the second inlet. So whatever I were to connect here would come here. Okay, but I don't need that. So I'm going to go ahead, build a few more things on this sub-patcher, and walk you through it. Okay, so I've built a few more things onto this sub-patcher. first off, we originally just had this one cycle object here, and I wanted to make the tone a bit more complex. So I've added a couple more cycle objects along with it. I've got those multiply objects there, which is telling it how loud or soft to be. If it was multiplied by 1, then that's the same level it was coming in. Any number larger than 1 would make it louder by that number, and anything between 1 and 0 would be making it softer. So I've made this first one here 0.4, and then that one's 0.2, so that one's like, a fifth, 20% of the original level, and that one's 40% of the original level. I've also got those coming into a multiply object here, because since we're adding 3 of them, I want to bring them all a little bit down, so, it's got a bit of headroom, it's not too loud. And by the fact that we're just sending all 3 of these patch cables into that one place, it's adding them together. I've also put in multiplies here, so we're taking in the frequency, multiplying it by 3 to go to that one, and multiplying by 5 to go to that one. So that's actually giving us 2 different overtones. If you know about the harmonic series and overtones, when you multiply the frequency a number of times, that's giving you different overtones and different partials. So this is a little very quick kind of additive synthesis kind of tutorial. So additive synthesis model, if you know an additive synthesis synthesizer, sorry. It's basically taking multiple simple waveforms, in this case the simplest kind of waveforms, sine waves, and adding them together to make a more complex sounding waveform. So when we listen to this, when we listen to this, I don't know about you, but I don't hear that as 3 different notes. I'm just hearing one note, one more complex, interesting tone with a little bit of bite. You can hear those upper overtones compared to what we were listening to before. Okay, and then we've got this bit here. So this is taking the velocity that was coming in before, and it's using that velocity to change how loud the note is, and also to control the ADSR, the envelope of the note. So on most synths, you'll hear about called an envelope or ADSR. I'm not going to go into that, but it's basically the shape of a note, how quickly the note comes on and how quickly the note goes off. So I'm going to say the note comes on over 10 milliseconds. It gets softer over 400. And it goes down to 0.1, and then 200 off. And because the ADSR object is used to getting numbers from 0 to 1, I had to take in my MIDI velocity, which is out of 127, and divide it by 127. So I got a number between 0 and 1. And you see here, if we go into that meter, you can see that's the shape of the envelope, those little peaks. So yeah, this is a very simple synthesizer. We've got 3 different oscillators being added together to make the tone that we want, and say we want a little bit of different tone. Maybe I want this to be the second harmonic. Sounds a bit different. And maybe I want this one to be the third harmonic, what we had before. Sounds a bit different again. I'm gonna go back to what I had. I like what I had. Okay, so now we're gonna build a little delay line. So we've gone through building something that creates notes. We've gone through building something that creates sound. We're gonna go into what I actually think is the most interesting bit of Max, which is building effects, and building effects that do beautiful and unique things. We're going to start with the absolute most basic, which is a delay. Okay, so here is my very simple delay line that I've built. It's a stereo delay, so it's taking in, if you see here, the synth is output, and we're following along the audio down into the first inlet, which is coming in here. And then it's got 2 outputs, which is sending us basically our left and right delays. I'm gonna turn up the mix so you can hear it. Oh, can't hear it yet. A delay line in Max is created out of, an audio delay is created out of these objects, the tap in and tap out objects. So the tap in object is where the audio goes into, and you set the absolute maximum you think your delay line is going to be. I've set it to 10 seconds or 10,000 milliseconds. And then each of your outputs you connect up and you tell it what you want the delays. So I've by default made them 1 second and 1.5 seconds, but I've got this here to control it, which goes out to those out inlets up here, so I can put the numbers in here. So maybe I'm gonna have it as I said, 1,000, and maybe just 300. There you go, we've got our delay line. So that's very simple. You might be wondering what this little bit is here, what's taking in those numbers, and that's basically a line object creates a line at signal rate, so it's creating a constant line which it's feeding into the tap out objects, and that's just how the tap out object understands the delay time. This little bit here, the $1 it's taking in whatever number I got there, and it's replacing the $1 with that number. So if I hover over here, you can see it's got the message 1,100. So it's replaced the $sign with the 1,000. If I change that to 500, you can see there 500, 100. And so the line object, what it does is it interprets that second number as how long it should take to get to that first number. So it's basically just smoothing it out. If I were to send it, for example, another message which said, let's say 4,000 over 10,000. So that would be saying to it, get to 4,000, but take 10 seconds to do it. And if you hear, that'll do something really weird to the sound of this delay line. It's kind of bending the pitch all over the place, and if you look at this line here, you can see how it's going up slowly. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that because it's not quite what we're after here. I'm gonna go back to putting in 500. I've also added in feedback. So feedback in a delay line, you probably know, is it's taking the output and feeding it back to the input. So I'm adding the two outputs together. There we go, an add tilde, which is just adding those two together. And then a multiply tilde, which, as I said before, is, in this instance, it's acting like a little fader. And I'm telling it to multiply that message by whatever I go in here. Again, I've got a little thing so it slides it up. It doesn't go immediately, in which case you'll hear a little bit of a click. And I've put a clip object there. And that's basically, the clip object is limiting your numbers to only be within that range. So I'm saying I don't want it to be over 0.8, otherwise we're gonna get like a big feedback, boomy, loud noise, and we don't want that. If we go back out into the main patch, I've got the feedback coming out here, and I've put in these two little objects that have nice little interfaces. This one here, if we go up here to add max for live object, and it's this one here, a dial, and I've made the dial output zero numbers from 0 to 100, and as a percentage, just looking like a percentage and giving it a name. So to give a new object a name, we go over to the I here, the inspector window. So the inspector window tells you all of the parameters and all of the things about whatever you've selected. So I've selected this, and you could set the color of the text. Maybe I want the text to be red for whatever reason. And I want its name, which is the short name here. You know, if I want it to be feedback, that's the feedback. I want its range to be 0 to 100, and I want it to look unit style to be a percentage. So that's what this one is. Then I've done that again to the mix. This mix is basically, let's go into this subpatcher. It's taking in the audio from the dry audio, so just the synth originally, and then the delay audio, so the 2 delay audio, and it's basically depending on how this mix knob is turned, giving you, we're just hearing the delay, and that's just the original synth. Let's add in a little bit of that feedback. Ooh, a little bit much. Okay, we've already got something that sounds really musical. We've got a nice little synthesizer with a little effect and a nice note generator that's already creating this lovely ambient soundscape that could be very musical and very useful. Maybe this is the bed to the backing of a track and you've used this as your first layer and you layer up other things on top of it. That's what I really like about Max, is you're able to create really beautiful generative things that are unique to you, and you can build them and then take them and use them how you like. And you may not even want to use specifically this, but maybe because of the generative nature of this, it sparks your imagination. It comes up with things that maybe you wouldn't have done yourself, and that leads you to go and research and do something else, and that's really exciting. You might be wondering how to integrate this with other things. And I'm going to show you my favorite integration, and actually a really great way for you to get your hands on a copy of Max without buying Max. And that's through Max for Live in Ableton. Okay, so we've opened up a new Ableton file. And what you might not know is that if you have the full version of Ableton, so Ableton Live Suite, it actually comes with a version of Max bundled into it and hidden in the background. So if you go over here where it says Max for Live, it'll give you these 3 categories: Max Audio Effect, Max Instrument, and Max MIDI. And so there are 3 ways of integrating Max into an Ableton session so that you can use it within your Ableton session. So we've actually in our main patch built something that could be one of those. Max MIDI Effect is basically a way of dealing with MIDI, and our random note generator over here is basically something that's generating MIDI. A Max Instrument is something that takes MIDI and uses it to make sound, so that's our synthesizer we've built. And a Max Audio Effect is something that takes in audio and affects it and does something new with it, and that's our delay here. So I'm going to show you quickly how to take all of the things that we've built in Max and bring them into a Max for Live device. So if we go to Max MIDI Effect, and we go Max MIDI Effect, the blank one right up the top, we add one of those into a MIDI track, you'll see it comes up here, and it looks like a little Max patch down the bottom. If we open it up, so if we go to this button here, it says Edit. If we go up, it opens a Max window with a different colored background, and that different colored background is just saying that this is a Max MIDI effect. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of the stuff that we want to be in this MIDI effect, which is all of this. We're gonna copy it, so I'm just going Command C to copy. We're gonna bring it over here, and we're gonna paste it. Now you might notice this line saying device vertical limit, so everything that's up above that will fit into here, so you'll be able to see it. And everything else you won't. And I'm just gonna put everything below, because obviously it's not gonna fit. Now, there's MIDI in and MIDI out. We're just going to ignore the MIDI in because we're generating our own MIDI, but if you want to do something that took MIDI and altered it in some way, that's what you do. And then MIDI out. Now, when you hover over the MIDI out, notice it says raw MIDI messages. So that's not... What we've got here is a MIDI note message, which is specifically formatted to be understood by things that understand MIDI notes. but we need to format it to make a raw MIDI message. So the way to do that is an object called MIDI format. No, it wants to come up with something else. MIDI format. MIDI format. Prepare data in the form of a MIDI message. So if we just connect that output there, and if you go to the first one, it says note on or off list. So pitch and velocity, and that's what we've got. So I'm going to connect that up down there. And I'm going to leave that one here so you can see it for whatever reason. And I'm going to put the on-off, the toggle, I'm going to put that back up there so we can still see it. And I might just put this little message box here too so we can see what's actually happening. Okay, cool. Lock it. And then we need to save it, so I am going to just save it on... I'm going to save it on the desktop. Okay, and I'm going to call it random note MIDI save. Okay, so it's saved that file, and there we go. We've got our random note generator. So if we turn that on, see the little clicking, it's saying that yes, a random note is coming out there. Okay, so now I need to put my synth in. So if we go to Max Instrument, we get a new one. It's come up with a different one. So instead of having MIDI in, MIDI out, it's got MIDI in, plug out, tilde. And the tilde tells you it's audio. So that's the audio that'll come out. Okay, so we're going to open them up. And again, we're going to take, well, our synth is already just like encapsulated up like that. So we're going to open him, copy him, and move it over here. Now again, this is where our synth is expecting a note on and off list, whereas that's sending raw MIDI data. So we need to do the opposite of what the MIDI format object was doing, and that object is called MIDI pass. So it interprets raw MIDI data. There we go. And see, it just has one input, which goes there, and has all these outputs. And if you look, the first one is a note on or off list, which is what we were using before. Put that there. Okay, so we've connected that, and we're going to connect it to both the left and the right. And we can hear our sound again. It's come back through. Let's save it. Just again on my desktop. Simple synth. There you go. We're taking our random MIDI note, putting it there, and then our output. Great. And you can see now it's going into our mixer-like setup in Ableton Live. Just put it a little softer. And finally, for the effect, max audio effect. And you'll see that this one is getting audio in and then audio out again. So I'm going to open that up. Cut off those patch cables because we don't need them. Right now, we're going to take all of our stuff from the delay, including all of those controls, because we want those controls. We're going to put them all in there. I'm just going to move all of this so you can't see it, because that doesn't really matter. So our input is going into our delay, and also into the dry input of the mixer, like we had it over here. And then we're taking what comes out of the mixer, sounding again. Let's put the delay times back in. And turn the mix up so we can hear it. There we go, great. A little bit of feedback again, because it's nice. Simple delay is what we'll call that one. Oh, need to write those numbers in again. Okay, there we go. We have got a really simple little few devices. We've got our nice delay line. Ooh, you know what I should have put into here? I'm gonna fix it. Put the little mixer in there so that we can control the volume. We crashed. We'll wait a second. That's one thing with Macs. Macs is a little bit of a CPU intensive program sometimes, so you need to save regularly, get into the habit of saving really, really regularly. And yeah, it's just is what it is. Okay, there we have it. We've got a really simple little system in Macs that we built in Macs, our random note generator, our synthesizer, and our delay, and that we've used and we've put into Macs for Live in Ableton so that we can use it inside an Ableton track. Hopefully that's just given you a really, really quick, and I know it has to be really quick, Macs is a really deep and vast program, but a little bit of a way into getting exploring in Macs, and I hope you please download those files that I've sent. I've also uploaded a few other much more complex files that I've created, patches that I've created, that you should definitely go into, try using them in your music. Go through, explore, use the help files like I was suggesting, and that's a really great way to learn about how the files work and how all of the stuff works. And hopefully they'll spark your imagination and get you interested in looking into what you can do in Macs. So I am going to, starting with this, I'm gonna add in a few other Macs for Live devices that I've built over the years, and do a little bit of a jam session for you to listen to. Maybe hopefully something interesting comes out of it. We'll see.